Exotics, something I have not gotten to discuss since game launch, but something I've talked about many times in the past. We've talked about buffing, nerfing, what exotics are supposed to be, what they're not supposed to be, what we want them to be. And today's video is going to touch on some exotics that need a little bit of love and just some general opinions on the state of exotics as they are right now. Been seeing some complaints about exotics, how they don't really fill that power fantasy as much as they feel like they used to, how weak they feel, stuff like that, how Destiny 1 had all the best crazy exotics. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that every exotic in Destiny 1 was the most thrilling experience. There were plenty of not that good exotics, specifically armor, in Destiny 1. In Destiny 2, though, it feels like Bungie went a bit heavier on the unique gameplay aspect of exotics as opposed to the power fantasy. But certain exotics do seem to be undertuned, and I don't think there's a reason that exotics can't fulfill the power fantasy and the unique gameplay fantasy at the same time. First of all, no, not every exotic weapon in the game is bad like some people are making it seem like. Sunshot, Risk Runner, Legend of Acreus, Wardcliff Coil, Borealis, Sweet Business, Merciless, Mida, Coldheart, plenty of great exotic weapons there, and they all fill a power fantasy to some degree. Merciless fills a power fantasy by just being really good. Wardcliff fills a power fantasy by being good and shooting a bunch of mini rockets everywhere. Sweet Business is a minigun, haven't had that before. Coldheart's a laser beam, etc., etc. Now, if we're looking for that game-changing Gallarhorn Sleeper Simulant style exotic, then I'd say yeah, we don't have that just yet, but I think that's somewhat by design. If everyone is using the same thing, then that's somewhat of a balance problem, but I will agree that it's fun having those kinds of weapons in the game, at least on the PvE side. It's fun to just crush everything. I don't think Destiny 2 falls outside of the range that Destiny 1 did with regards to its power level spread amongst exotics. You have some middle-of-the-pack stuff, and then you have some really not that great stuff. And I think people are really just kind of getting caught up in the not great stuff and thinking that everything is bad as a result. I've already done a little rant on Rat King about how difficult it is to get a 6-stack to begin with and how the reward for doing so is just not there, so we'll leave that out of this conversation. As a sidearm, it's fine, but people aren't picking up Rat King because it's an overpowered sidearm. I think a good example of a weapon that needs a slightly better power fantasy experience is something like Graviton Lance. Now, is Graviton Lance as bad as a lot of people claim it to be? Probably not. It is a bit more difficult to use than your average weapon, but that doesn't really change the fact that the feeling that I feel like I should be getting out of the exotic is not there. Graviton Lance is a pulse rifle that you kind of need to treat like a scout rifle. Its third shot deals significantly more damage with no range penalty, but that does come with a damage penalty to your first 2 shots in the burst. So if you're not hitting your crits, this gun is not going to treat you very well. That is the exotic perk. Then we have the other perk where whenever you kill something, you detonate the target. When you think detonate, you're probably thinking something like Sunshot, where a target explodes in a big way. The effect is not as strong as Sunshot, or doesn't feel like it's as strong, which is disappointing because I think Sunshot basically sets the bar for that effect. What is the feeling that I'm looking for with Graviton Lance? Well, the theme of black hole is all over the weapon. It's in the name of the perk, it's all over the lore, and yet I don't make a black hole when I shoot this gun. That's the power fantasy that I'm looking for with this gun. If I get a precision kill, maybe a miniature black hole should spawn that sucks up enemies for a short time, and then the black hole could deal damage over time, or it could explode, or something like that, and then you slap a cooldown on that effect happening. That's the feeling that I'm looking for with this gun. Then you have something like Fighting Lion, which is another thing that people think is just really overly bad. Much like your teenage daughter, Fighting Lion isn't bad, it's just misunderstood. The way you're supposed to use this thing is to rip off an enemy's shield with a grenade, you swap to a different weapon, you get the kill, it refills your Fighting Lion, rinse, repeat. It's not designed as anything more than that, but everyone thinks it's completely useless. It's not, but if they wanted to buff this thing anyway, I would take it. Armor, however, is another story. Yes, I hear you, person yelling at the screen, that weapons aren't the problem. Armor seems to be much more passive this time around. Some armor pieces just take subclass perks from Destiny 1 and throws them onto armor. See Skull of Daira Hamkara, Howl of Fire Heart, Wings of Sacred Dawn. Some exotics are literally just Destiny 1 exotics brought into Destiny 2. But then there's some armor pieces that are really good. One that's getting a ton of flack, though, is the ACD0 feedback fence. This is an exotic that wasn't really used that much in Destiny 1, was brought into Destiny 2, and is still just not being used. The perk on it now is where melee kills build energy in the arms, and when you're hit by something, you explode with arc energy. To say the explosive effect is underwhelming would be a disservice to the word underwhelming. It is underwhelming. The most amount of Fury charges you can stock up on is 3, so let's see what that does, and... I'm sorry, did that say 20 damage? 20? Okay, what about on a Fallen? Maybe you gotta be really close. Nope, that is some terrible, terrible damage. Oh, and as a matter of fact, it's the same amount of damage as 0 stacks. So, okay, these aren't bad, they're just terribly broken. Not to mention the impracticality of trying to get this to trigger in difficult content, or even the desire to. Why would I willingly put myself in danger for such a terrible payout? I should be able to stock up like 10 melee kills, even more, get hit by something, and then just have the entire area around me explode. That is a power fantasy. That is doing something cool. Are there maybe technical limitations with that? I'm sure there's something. But that's how you're going to fill that power fantasy with these gloves. That's the power fantasy I'm looking for. I build up a ton of charge, and then I'm just waiting for something to hit me so that I just erupt with electrical damage. What's weird, maybe not weird, but nice, is that Winter's Guile, the Warlock Gauntlets, do fill that melee power fantasy kind of well, stacking crazy melee damage bonuses, allowing you to just run around and punch everything to death. Everything. Some other exotics feel kind of bland, but that's because they're trying to do something really specific. Mechaneer's Trick Sleeves, the sidearm boosting gloves, they're getting a lot of flack, but it's not like they don't do their job well, they just happen to do it for a playstyle that isn't really that popular. I've heard complaints that hunter exotics are kind of bad, and I don't really think that's true. Each subclass has a top-tier exotic, Celestial Nighthawk, Raiden Flux, and Orpheus Rig, and then you have 4 subclass neutral exotics that are all not too shabby for PvP. Knucklehead Radar, Stompies, Foe Tracer, and Dragon's Heart is maybe not as good as the others, but still okay. But people look at Mechaneers and Lucky Pants and just go, man, hunter exotics are so bad, and I don't really think that's true. What I can sympathize with is the fact that some of them just maybe aren't very exciting or give an insane power fantasy. They're strong, but seeing the radar when aiming isn't too much of a power fantasy. Having a longer super isn't really a power fantasy. I think it's more that hunters want their exotics to do more unique things, sort of like the feedback fences if they got a big buff, where they can, go charge themselves up and then give off a big explosion. Something like that. I imagine it's difficult to come up with exotics that, 1, are really good or feel powerful, 2, fulfill some sort of fantasy, 3, are balanced, and 4, are able to be engineered in the first place. It's not our job to be sympathetic to those plights, but it's still something to keep in mind. I don't think exotics were ever meant to be the game-shaping, game-defining guns that they ended up becoming in Destiny 1. It doesn't feel like Bungie wanted them to be as impactful on the gameplay experience this time around, and would rather just give people a neat toy to play with, as opposed to making items that felt integral to the gameplay experience. For some people, that's a plus. I'm not locked to anything in particular, but if I want to use a certain exotic, it'll influence how I play a little bit more than if I wasn't wearing one. For some people, that's a minus. I want to feel insanely strong with an exotic. I want it to be more of a driver of gameplay. I want it to fulfill a fantasy that I have. Finally, I think it's also partly that there's only so many ideas that you can come up with for Destiny exotic perks. We've been through a lot of perks, and you can only come up with so many ways to make something explode or do a weird thing. Then you gotta engineer it, and you gotta make sure it doesn't break the game. Again, you don't need to sympathize with that. It's not your job to be sympathetic. It's Bungie's job to realize what we have an issue with, and then come up with more ways to solve those issues. Anyway, those are some thoughts on exotics. Overall, I don't think we're in a hugely terrible spot with exotics, but I think more can be done in terms of giving out some buffs to some of the weaker ones, and in terms of making things a little more exciting. People aren't maybe getting that Destiny 1 sense of power, and I think tossing some love to exotics could help relieve that a little bit. If you enjoyed this video, a positive rating would be very appreciated. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you next time.